budget update for the 2014-15 federal budget. Joining us today is myself, Brett Griffiths, and Kim Reynolds. We're both directors of Vincents Chartered Accountants, and we're part of the team last night that were analysing the budget and putting together the update that's really about integrity measures. It was more about dealing with expenditure and also starting to, I suppose, the journey dealing with the middle class welfare situation rather than about creating new forms of revenue streams. Well, they certainly did increase some of the taxes that we'll get into. It wasn't about creating new revenue streams, it was more about tweaking what we already have. So I suppose without any further ado, we shall start, and I'll hand over to Kim to talk about some of the tax implications.
Okay, thanks, Brett. The first thing I just wanted to talk about was in relation to the individuals and things that impact on individuals. One of the things that we'd all heard a little bit about over the last few weeks is potential changes to personal tax rates as a result of the temporary budget repair levy, as it's been called. Now that levy was formally introduced last night, and I think the legislation's being cleared for introduction into Parliament today. Once all the rumours and everything stopped, the budget announcement was actually that the budget repair levy will be, as the word suggests, a temporary levy. It will be a levy of 2%, and it'll be levied on individuals with taxable incomes in excess of $180,000. It'll also apply from the 1st of July this year for 3 years. So coincidentally, that will be time to just finish around when the next federal election is due to be called. So the other issue that impacts on personal tax rates, although not an announcement in the budget last night, but for everybody to keep in mind, is the increase in Medicare levy. And that increase will take effect from the 1st of July 2014, and so the Medicare levy from 1 July will be 2%. So basically what that means is the 2014-15 year, including the Medicare levy, the top marginal tax rate that kicks in at $180,000 will be 49%. Now obviously that's going to have an impact on how much tax we pay next year, obviously, but prior to next year, prior to 30 June, once we're all, as advisors, finished with lodging the 2013 tax returns, etc., and we're doing tax planning for the 2014 year, we need to be looking at what things we can do to, I guess, take advantage of the fact that we are going to have a higher tax rate next year. So all the traditional tax planning measures like bringing forward revenue and deferring deductions will all come into play to see whether there's anything that we can do to impact on or to lessen the impact of these increased rates that will hit us next year. The other thing to be aware of is that the Medicare levy surcharge and the private health insurance offset thresholds are both going to be frozen for 3 years from the 1st of July 2015. In line with Brett's comment about looking at the perceived middle class welfare that's around, and as I think it was foreshadowed in the 2011-12 MyEFO announcements, that the dependent spouse tax offset is going to be abolished, and that's going to be abolished from the 1st of July 2014. And also the mature age worker offset is being abolished from the same time. So they will also have an impact for those particular taxpayers in those demographics for next year. So as far as rates are concerned, tax rates, etc., that was pretty much everything that impacted on individuals. The other thing to be aware of as far as the family assistance side of things is concerned, if you are or are aware of people that are on New Start or sickness allowances, then you need to be aware that the rate of or the eligibility age is going to be increased from 22 to 24 from the 1st of July 2015. And also New Start claimants that are under 30 must be able to demonstrate job searching and also participation in employment-related activities for 6 months before they receive payments. So that will no doubt create a little bit of angst amongst people that are on those allowances, but it goes towards the government trying to encourage everybody, and particularly younger people, to get into the workforce as early as possible. Everybody's doing the heavy lifting, according to Joe Hockey. Family tax benefit changes. Now these changes were foreshadowed, I think, a few weeks ago, and essentially what they mean is that there will be a freeze for 2 years from the 1st of July 2014 of the family tax benefits. The family tax benefit Part B from the 1st of July 2015 will have a reduced primary earner income limit, be reduced from $150,000 down to $100,000 per annum, and due to the change, the income threshold of the dependent tax offset will also be reduced to $100,000. The family tax benefit Part B will also be limited. So from 1 July 2015, it will be limited to families whose youngest child is younger than 6 years of age. And however, there will be a transitional arrangement. So if you've got children, families whose youngest child is under age 6 or over, on the 30th of June 2015, there'll be a 2-year transitional arrangement in place. There'll also be a new family tax benefit allowance for single parents, where I think it's $750 for each child aged between 6 and 12 years old. And it will be provided to single parents on the maximum rate of the family tax benefit Part A, where their youngest child is aged between 6 and 12, as I said, when they become ineligible for the family tax benefit Part B. There'll also be a revision of end-of-year supplements, so that they'll be revised by the government to their original values, and the indexation of those amounts will cease from the 1st of July 2015. So those revisions basically provide a $600 per annum per family tax benefit Part A child, and $300 per family per annum for each family tax benefit Part B family. In addition, there'll be a freeze on other government payments, thresholds for government payments, for a period of 3 years. The timing of when those freezes take place will depend on the nature of the payment being made. So non-pension related payments, the freeze will start from the 1st of July 2014. However, pension related payments are going to change. The freezing starts on the 1st of July 2017. Also, as we've heard in the recent weeks, the disability support pension is going to be reviewed for recipients under 35. So where you or a client may have a disability support pension and that person is under 35, then there will be a review process that takes place over I think it's the next 12 months or so, of everybody under 35, just to assess what their work capacity is, and in an effort, again, as the government's been saying, to try and get more people into the workforce and not rely on the government for that support. I'll just hand over to Brett now, and he's going to go through the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card and then lead into some superannuation changes.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I suppose the changes to the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card are more to do about consistency in last year's budget announcement, where there'll be a deeming essentially of account-based pensions. So from 1 January 2015, any account-based pension that is received is essentially deemed for the age pension requirements. What this measure announced last night is intended to do is essentially create consistency between the age pension and the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card. So For any account-based pensions that are commenced after 1 January 2015, they will be deemed and considered as part of the threshold requirements. Any account-based pensions that were started prior to 1 January 2015, they'll be essentially grandfathered or excluded under these new rules. So that's just something to bear in mind as part of the, I suppose, the planning process for you as you move into retirement. As far as the superannuation changes go, I think probably the biggest news from last night regarding super was that there really weren't any major changes. Now, essentially there's a couple of reasons for this. One is that the coalition government have had the belief that there's been so many changes over the years that they sort of wanted to ease it off a little bit, which is fantastic, so mission accomplished there. But independently, there's also an inquiry called the Murray Financial Systems Inquiry that's going on in the background currently. That's due to release an interim report mid this year into essentially the financial services system, which also includes superannuation. So there may be some recommendations out of that inquiry which could potentially flow into next year's budget. So at this stage we essentially have a 12-month reprieve, which is fantastic news. However, there were a couple of things from last night's budget that are worth mentioning. There's a change in the way that excessive non-concessional contributions are handled inside superannuation. There's what they've determined a rephrasing of the superannuation guarantee rate, and also I thought it was worthwhile just mentioning about an increase in the concessional contribution caps. So in a bit more detail, the excessive non-concessional contributions refunding, so this is where a member of a super fund contributes more than their non-concessional contribution cap, which at the moment is $150,000 or $450,000 under the bring forward arrangements. So this now means that, or currently, if you don't have really an option to refund that excessive amount, unless it's made in one lump sum, and there's some technicalities around that. So now what they're saying is there'll be some options. You can leave it inside superannuation and pay tax at the top marginal tax rate. Currently the tax rate on excessive non-concessional contributions is a staggering 93%. So this will actually change it to the top marginal rate, so obviously in the high 40s, far better result. But also, I suppose in addition to that, if the superannuation member doesn't want to pay that tax, they can actually refund the excessive or withdraw it back to themselves, and they will only pay tax on the associated earnings from that non-concessional contribution and pay that at their normal marginal tax rate. Now, I suppose as with anything, the devil's in the detail. And at the moment there's not a lot of detail. Essentially they're talking about industry consultation as far as this measure goes. So we'll have to wait for that to find out a bit more, specifically about the timing of when that withdrawal can actually occur. Now the rephrasing of the superannuation guarantee, this is essentially recognition that the mining tax regime that's currently, or the repeal of the mining tax that's currently in the Senate, is not likely to actually get through before 1 July. So what they're basically doing is they're going to keep the 2014 SGC rate at the current legislative increase of 9.5%. So that's a 0.25% increase on what we have today. So that's already in legislation. Technically there's no change to that. Where the change comes about was that the coalition government were going to reduce or freeze the 9.25 for another couple of years. So by essentially ignoring that, they're acknowledging that the Senate is going to be a difficult beast to deal with for the next few years, and they're going to need some time. So what they're proposing is to freeze the 9.5% SGC for 2014 through to 2017, and then have a 0.5% increase year on year after that until 2022. So as you can see from the table, previously, or as the legislation stands at the moment, the 12% is legislated to take into effect on 2019. So it's a delay of the ultimate increase of the SGC to 12% by another couple of years. Now, while not specifically a budget announcement from last night, it's certainly worth noting, as part of the budget wrap-up, that the concessional contribution caps will increase from 1 July 2014. The reason why it's worth noting is that in prior budgets, they've actually frozen the indexation of the concessional contributions cap. That did not occur last night, so what you can see before you is to occur. So in a nutshell, that means that those under 49, as at 30 June 2014, their concessional contribution cap will be $30,000, so for the 2015 financial year. Those who are aged 49 or older from 1 July will have a concessional contribution cap of $35,000. Now, this is important because it also has an implication for the non-concessional contribution rate. So, by virtue of multiplication, the non-concessional rate increases from $150,000 today to $180,000 as of 1 July 2014. And for those that are eligible, so that is under 65, the bring forward increases from $450,000 up to $540,000. So that's certainly something to factor in if you are thinking about making contributions, or you have clients thinking about making contributions into superannuation, that delaying it by essentially another 6 weeks or stagnating it over between this year and next financial year can potentially mean a lot more money into super. As far as the age pensions go, it's worthwhile noting that there'll be an increase of the age pension to age 70. However, this won't really take into account until 2035. So from 2025, there'll be an increase of 6 months over every 2 years. So that means that by the time that someone who is eligible for the age 70, being 70 receiving the age pension, won't actually occur until 2035. So as with most things relating to this, there is a long lead time. I suppose it's also really important to note here too that this does not affect the preservation age. This only relates to the age pension age. Preservation will increase up to age 60 for those who are born after 1965. So if you're born before 1965, your preservation age will be somewhere between 55 and 60. Those who are born after 1965, their preservation age will be 60. So that means that you can access your superannuation at a potentially 10 years earlier or more to what the age pension may be. So that's just, I suppose, something to bear in mind for the eventual retirement planning. Indexation of pensions and sort of pension equivalents, what they're actually doing is they're changing how that works. Currently there's a couple of different mechanisms in which the age pension can increase. That's through what's called the AWOTI, which is the average weekly ordinary time earnings, or CPI, whichever is the higher. The changes would mean that it will just be CPI, which they're expecting quite a significant saving from by having it at one rate rather than potentially a couple of different rates, or the maximum of a couple of different rates. Also, they're looking to reset the pension deeming rates thresholds. So they'll be changing from down to $30,000 and $50,000. So $30,000 for singles and $50,000 for couples. And that'll take effect from the 20th September 2017. Now those rates will actually decrease from 46,600 and 77,400. So there's quite a significant decrease in the deeming rates there. So that's just something, once again, to bear in mind as part of any potential planning that you're doing. And also, I suppose it goes back to Kim's comment before about how they're essentially trying to tackle this perceived middle-class welfare. So on that, I will hand over to Kim to talk about the changes for the business tax rates.
Okay, thanks, Brett. So it was confirmed last night that the government would proceed with the reduction of the company tax rate from 30% to 28.5%. It's something that the previous government had promised but hadn't quite made its way through to legislation as yet. So as I said, the current government's supported that now. In addition to that reduction, however, for large companies, and at this stage it looks like companies that have a taxable income of more than $5 million, will also have to pay a paid parental leave levy of 1.5%. So if you're a large company with a taxable income above $5 million, then essentially your tax rate doesn't change. But if you have a taxable income of less than $5 million, then you'll see a lower tax rate. So there'll be some adjustments. We haven't seen a change in company tax rates for a few years now, and for those of you that were around when the last change happened, there were changes to franking credit balances and the like, so that we can make sure that flow through an individual disadvantage from the change in rates. Those sorts of things will need to be looked at. And similarly, from, as I said, from a personal perspective, personally we're looking at income tax rates going up next year. So we want to defer deductions and bring forward revenue. In a company situation, we might want to turn that on its head, so delay recognising revenue and bring forward some deductions so that we can take advantage of the different rates, the lower rate that will come in the future. The other announcement last night was in relation to the R&D tax incentive. Now the government seems to have hit the R&D scientific startup communities particularly hard, I guess, in this budget. The R&D tax incentive is one example of where that's happened. Essentially what they've done is suggested that the incentive will be reduced in the 2014-15 year, so the net benefit will be reduced from 15% and 10% respectively, so that basically reflects the tax offset of 45% or 40%, whether it depends on whether you get a refundable offset or not. So it'll be reduced from 15% and 10% respectively to 13.5% and 8.5% for all companies. However, from the 1st of July 2015, the benefit that will be available will depend on whether the paid parental leave applies. So if you're a small company, then your R&D tax incentive will be 15% and 10% respectively, but if you're a large company, then you'll stick with that lower rate of 13.5% and 8.5%. So it's something that we will notice in the startup sector, where we're doing a little bit of work at the moment, and those larger businesses that are trying to develop new and inventive technologies and processes and the like. So we'll see how that proceeds in the coming weeks. The other rate change for business is in relation to FBT. I mentioned before about the individual tax rates going up to essentially the top rate going up to 49%, Medicare levy going up as well. Whenever personal income tax rates go up, there's always an incentive for employees or individuals employees particularly, to try and salary sacrifice amounts, so get some of their remuneration paid in some form of benefits and the like. And if the FBT rate didn't change, then there would be an advantage to be sought there. So the FBT rate is being increased to 49% from the 1st of July 2015. And that's just in line with the personal tax rates increasing in that year.
And I suppose, Kim, just as a bit of a side note too, with that decrease in the company tax rate, it also now means that there is a potential, I'll call it a tax leakage if you like, for excessive contributions taxes that are made into excessive contributions that are made into superannuation, as well as the new 293 tax for higher income earners on their superannuation contributions. Because now we have a situation where the company tax rate is less than 30%, whereas the contributions in sort of those situations can be taxed up to 30%. So now there's a overall, for say an individual who's part of a broader group that has control over the group, there is now more disincentive to make excessive contributions into superannuation or contributions into super where they earn more than $300,000, whereas previously it's essentially a tax neutral transaction. So that's an interesting sort of sideline to the decrease in that company tax rate, while the other tax rates haven't changed as yet.
And I've just noticed while Brett was talking that I did mention 1 July 2015 there. It should actually be 1 April 2015 when the year that the FBT year, the time when the FBT year starts. The rush in getting these slides together. I've stuck with July rather than April. So. Now, other changes that are happening for business is, well, one of the things that we noticed last night was that this budget, unlike some of the previous budgets from the last government, there's not a lot of integrity measures within the budget. So a lot of the integrity measures that have been announced in the past have either been ditched completely in earlier announcements by the new government, or they're being deferred. And a couple of examples of that from last night were the changes in start dates for some of the integrity measures in relation to tax consolidation. So some of the loopholes, for want of a better word, are being deferred to later years. Data matching programs that the ATO was running, and the matching of information overall to allow, I guess, better collection of information by the government authorities has been delayed. And the managed investment trusts changes are going to be deferred again until the 1st of July 2015. They were supposed to start on the 1st of July 2014. The other measure that has been, I guess, refined is that previously the government had announced that capital gains tax and non-residents, where foreign residents had dealings, where there were dealings within consolidated groups, there are amendments to be made so that we would ignore, or to prevent essentially multiple counting of asset values. That will still go ahead and was effective from the 14th of May last year. However, now the measure is going to be extended to also apply to interests that are held by foreign residents in unconsolidated groups also. And that will take effect from the 13th of May this year, so budget night last night. Now, I mentioned before about certain sectors of the community being hit, and research and startups, etc., are particularly going to be feeling the pinch in the next little while. Some of the government incentive programs that have been announced that are going to cease in the near future are, as you can see there on the slide, the Australian Industry Participation Incentive Programs, Commercialisation Australia, which is an area that we've done a bit of work in the last few years. That will be a particularly much missed incentive. Enterprise Solutions, the Enterprise Connect system, and some of those others there that you can see that where there's, I guess, those that are connected with R&D or innovation, small companies trying to build the next new big thing. Those incentive programs have been essentially axed. So what wasn't mentioned in relation to business taxes? I mentioned before about tax rates changing because of the paid parental leave levy. However, the details of the paid parental leave levy weren't really detailed in the budget last night, so there's just been really a lot more speculation as to what the details are going to be. It's expected to apply to taxable incomes over $5 million, as I said earlier, but again, we still need to wait for a lot more detail. Employee share schemes. There's a discussion paper released by Treasury a couple of months ago now in relation to how employee share schemes work, and particularly their application to the startup sector, because the startup sector is finding that those schemes or the rules that relate to them are a bit of a barrier in that sector. So there's been some discussion as to how those rules might change. But again, nothing was clarified last night. There was some discussion last year about large companies disclosing their tax payment details. So large companies being really large companies where they've got a turnover in excess of $100 million. There was no mention of that last night. The base erosion profit shifting, or BEPS, arrangements where every government in the world is trying to prevent their tax revenue moving to some other jurisdiction. There was no mention in the budget last night, but as I'm sure you're all aware and you've seen in the press, there's been quite a bit of activity on that front for the last 12 months or so. So I don't think it's that the government's not doing anything about it, but it's not in a legislative form at the moment. It's more about sharing information amongst various countries around the world and putting pressure on companies that are perceived to be doing the wrong thing by those governments. The other thing that wasn't really mentioned last night was the $6,500 instant asset write-off. Now I'm sure we all remember late last year and earlier this year where we were saying to people that the instant asset write-off for the $6,500 was going to go away from the 1st of January, and essentially that's still the proposal. However, the legislation that introduced the reduction of that instant asset write-off back to $1,000 hasn't yet passed, because it is part of the repeal of the mining tax, and as Brett said before, it's caught up in the Senate at the moment, so it's still in limbo a little bit, which provides us with a little bit of uncertainty as to what we do between now and 30 June as part of that tax planning. But I guess it keeps us on our toes. But just keep that in mind, that it's an announcement. The legislation has been introduced into Parliament, but it hasn't actually passed, so it's not law yet. As far as the indirect taxes side of things was concerned, the only real change announced was in relation to the fuel excise levy, and again that was something that we had heard some talk about prior to the budget speech last night. Essentially, the indexation of the levy, which was frozen I think back in 2001, is now being reintroduced. The start date of the 1st of August this year. And the proceeds from that increase are going to be linked to road funding. There were no changes for GST or wine equalisation tax or the fuel tax credit system. So, but GST is something that I think will be a point of discussion as a result of some of the other cost-cutting measures that the government did announce last night. For example, the government introduced the co-contribution for doctors' visits of $7, again something that we had heard quite a bit about prior to the budget. That co-contribution is to take effect from the 1st of July 2015, and there'll also be a reduction in the subsidies under the PBS, so the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. My understanding is that there's going to be a $5 essentially flat fee for prescriptions. Is one of the measures under those subsidies that are going to be changed. So those two measures there are going to go towards a medical research endowment fund that the government is establishing, that it hopes that within 6 years it will be the largest of its kind in the world. And so it's for a good cause, I guess, but the proof will be in the pudding. It's a future fund with a different slant on it, I guess, than the previous future fund that previous governments have introduced. The other big change that was announced last night was in relation to education. Again, not really a tax issue as such, but for those that are involved in the education sector, those particularly that have got help debts that need to be repaid, the income repayment threshold is going to be reduced from the 2016-17 year, and the repayment rate, there'll be a repayment rate of 2% for incomes above $50,638. The government's also announced that there will be trade support loans for apprentices, so it's something similar to help support that's provided to university students, but these are for apprentices that are going into trades. The financial assistance is going to be for up to $20,000 over a 4-year apprenticeship, and there'll be a staggered amount over each of those 4 years, depending on what year they're in, as to how much they receive. And one of the big items, I guess, that has got a number of people talking is that the government's going to allow universities to set their own fees from the 1st of July 2016. So for courses that are commenced today, from the 1st of July 2016, the universities will set their own fees. So there was talk last night after the budget announcement of there being, elitism in universities, etc., and it making it tougher for state governments, particularly in dealing with education, and also some of the changes they announced in health. It'll put more pressure on the state governments. I said to somebody quite, I guess, a little bit cynically this morning that those changes might actually force the hand of the state governments to at least start discussing changes to the GST with the federal government, whether that's changing rate or changing the distribution methods or whatever. But health and education are areas that are generally dealt with by the states with some federal assistance, and that federal assistance seems to have been pulled back quite significantly. I think there's talk of about $80 billion over the next 10 years or so. So that's quite a big amount to take out of the system, and will essentially force the states to talk to the federal government about how to continue to be able to fund the things that they need to fund as well. Okay, so that's basically everything from the budget tonight, or the highlights of the budget from last night. As I've said a couple of times, it is a budget that we heard a lot of the things beforehand, and so there were no real surprises that were in there. And it was, unlike some previous budgets, it was the hard choices that the government said they were going to have to make, it appears that they have made. The challenge will, however, be getting those through the Parliament, selling them to us, the taxpayers and the voters, and getting them through both houses of Parliament is also going to be a challenge. Up until the 1st of July, they've got a particularly unfriendly Senate, and after the 1st of July, then we've got other minor parties that are going to have some influence in the way things are handled. So I think there will be some challenges along the way, but that's what keeps it interesting, I guess. So I guess it's important to remember that keep all of these things in mind that we've talked about today, but until they're legislated, they're not set in stone just yet. But if there's any planning that you're doing, then keep these in mind. And of course, if you've got any questions after the session today, feel free to contact either Brett or myself or your Vincents advisor. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Hope you have a good day, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.